therapeutic exercise continuing for the rotator cuff. So it's pretty much an exercise program to rehabilitate your rotator cuff. And that was really interesting and was kind of the missing piece when it came to a lot of the shoulder stuff that I've done. Because if you look at the shoulder, it ends up kind of breaking into three parts. You got like the glenohumeral joint, which is the true shoulder joint, and a lot of times the focus ends up being a lot of the primary muscles. You know, the big muscles that we can see, pec major, you know, deltoid, lats. But then you end up going deeper, you end up having this scapular stabilizer, so that ends up being a third group, or a second group, and then the third group ends up being the rotator cuff. And you end up having to address all of them. A lot of times those primary muscles aren't the issue. It's the scapular stabilizers that end up lacking the activation, endurance, and strength. And because they're not functioning properly, what ends up happening is the rotator cuff ends up picking up the load and working harder to kind of compensate for that slack ass scapular stabilizing muscles. And what ends up happening is a lot of times the rotator cuff will end up getting injured. Focus on exercise rehab. Done a variety of writing and course presenting. So thanks for coming to the conference. I'll give away a couple of my books now. Does anyone know the name of my website? And I'll give away at the end one of my courses I have on DVD, like a 3-hour course on core stability. So kind of the step before a lot of the Stu McGill work or a lot of the stuff that we end up learning at fitness conferences, a lot of times those exercises will be too painful for people or too difficult or too challenging. We need to take a step back. So I'll give that away at the end of the presentation. If you're looking for the handout, so you have a handout right now, and it's a pretty basic handout. And what I have up here, I kind of tweaked things and added a number of things. If you want to get the handouts, you just go to exercisesforinjuries.com/BCRPA, and you can download what you see up here. So what I'll go through, I kind of highlighted injuries when it relates to weight training, strength exercise that can increase the risk of injuries, and exercise modification. So kind of highlighting shoulder injuries. So like a lot of the stats tend to be in the U.S. So about 4 million people in the U.S. seek medical care each year when it relates to shoulder sprains, strains, dislocation, other problems. And the shoulder is really interesting compared to the back and the knee. I mean, with the back, everything that we do, it kind of kicks in. So a lot of people are more likely to deal with the back, their back injury. When it comes to the knee, well, we end up, knee and hip, we have to kind of move around. And even if it's hobbling around, even that hobbling around will end up helping the individual recover from their knee injury or hip injury. But when it comes to the shoulder, people just don't use it, or they use their other arm, or they just decrease their activity, they eliminate activity. So the shoulder joint's interesting, or shoulder injuries, and then you end up getting into that vicious cycle. They use it less, they have less strength, you know, they lose muscle mass, so then they kind of get in that vicious cycle that their shoulder injury never gets better and it kind of gets worse because they're not using that shoulder. While like in the knee and the hip, you got to kind of move around. Not many of us want to be walking around with a cane or being in a wheelchair. We want to move around. Each year, shoulder problems account for about 1.5 million visits to the orthopedic surgeon. I know with a lot of my clients, they end up having some sort of shoulder issue previous, or even when I start assessing and chatting with them, I can kind of see when they're doing the exercises, looking at those three areas, the shoulder joint, true shoulder joint, looking at the scapula, looking at the rotator cuff. A lot of times I'll see one of those areas turned off or not working properly, and it's a lot of times the scapular stabilizing muscle. So most common shoulder injuries that you end up seeing, rotator cuff definitely is the most common that I end up seeing or people will complain about. Shoulder dislocation of subluxation, you see those usually in kind of two groups. Someone that's had some sort of injury or trauma, and then someone that really has a lot of flexibility. So they end up having excess movement